Folks, welcome back to part two of my conversation with Mr. Boitshoko Molefhi on the recent seismic election in Botswana, right, happening in October of 2024, with the results coming in and the inauguration coming in November 2024. I had not anticipated that it would run that long, but since it ran a little bit longer, just under 2 hours, we decided to split it into two parts. And this is the second part right here. If you haven't watched the first part, make sure you do that. Link in the description here. But also, since we're talking about Southern Africa in general, something happened as we were editing this video, and that is the death of Sam Nujoma, Mr. Sam Nujoma, who was the first democratically elected president of Namibia, a guerrilla activist par excellence, prominent member of the struggle for Southern Africa's struggle for independence. He was the leader of SWAPO, which is the liberating party out of Liberia, and he just passed away at 95 this past weekend. In many ways, he's been dubbed the founding father of the Namibian nation. So a very, very important figure. As we're just talking about difference makers in the region, we just wanted to take a moment here to bid him farewell and wish him continued rest in power going forward. Without further ado, rejoin us for my interview and conversation with Mr. Boitshoko Molefhi. Thank you very much.
And so with then just to tie it to the Masisi Ian Khama debacle, there may have been some political legitimacy to that to Senator Khama's issues with Masisi. But the bigger part of it is more so around their personal issues.
Okay.
Right. It was a very personal dispute more than it was political.
Right.
Right. And we have seen during the Masisi eras where, and again, of course, it happened in other eras, but with the Masisi presidency, where people were being targeted through government and state resources that did not align with, the government, the presidential, rhetoric. So it was more so around their differences in that, Khama felt Masisi didn't, show him the same deference
Right.
that, he had shown him when he was president. And so, that then became an issue, right? It's like, well, I put you on.
Yeah.
Right. Now you want to disrespect your big homie. You know what I mean? So that is what the dynamic really was. It wasn't really political. And so when BPF is founded, right, that only makes noise within the central district, which is where Sefer Khama is from.
Yeah.
Right, as the paramount chief of the Babangwatu, who are, beholden to the central district of Botswana. Okay. That is where, when you look at the electoral results, BPF wins predominantly within that area because it's people voting in loyalty to their, to their paramount chief.
So not very unlike like Zululand, right? Like KwaZulu.
Yeah.
As Inkatha goes, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, but did that not eat away into Masisi's votes?
So going back to 2019 as well, BPF again ran, because BPF was put together last minute in 2019, right, to disrupt and so BPF essentially competed in the same areas it competed in 2019.
Okay.
So there wasn't a stark difference. Like again, if you look at the 2017, 2019 results, right, that the UDC aggregate includes BCP. Right. And so to win in 2024 without the BCP the way they did, because remember, BCP has 15 seats in 2024, right? UDC has 36.
Yeah.
Right. That means they lost like one of their major partners splintered away from them,
Mm-hmm.
right? But and they still won, the 36 majority, right? So it wasn't tied to the Masisi Kama issue. It was
Ah,
just people saying, you know what, come what may, we don't want the BDP,
right. So,
right?
so if I can be very simplistic here, this is definitely a case of the BDP losing this election and not necessarily more than the UDC winning it.
Yes, I would venture to say that,
Okay.
right? That it's more so the BDP. It was the BDP's election to win, right?
Yeah.
Coming from 2019, like it was their election to win,
Right.
right? And then when you get into 2024, it is UDC's election to lose. In that people are saying, "Look, come what may, we don't want this guy,"
Right.
right? So now you have to show yourself to be, you know,
Mm.
to be worthy of our vote,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Is BDP gonna be back?
Ah, man. I think that one will largely depend on who they select to
Okay.
lead their party in the next 5 years.
Right.
Like I said, the the beauty of the first past the post system
Mm.
is that you are voting for a candidate in your constituency,
Right.
regardless of the color that they wear. You
Mm.
are voting for the person that you want.
Mm.
And a lot of the decisions in 2024 boiled down to people saying, we don't know this person,
All right.
we don't like them,
Mhm.
but that guy over there, even though he's wearing this purple shirt,
Yeah.
we know him,
Yeah.
we've seen him, we know what he's about, right? He may not wear the color shirt that I wear,
Right.
but I know him from around the way,
That is so good. Yeah. Mm.
right? So that is what the decisions boil down to, at
Mm.
least within the confines of the politics of Botswana.
Right.
Right. And so, if at a party level, the BDP can create an environment where people can choose their representatives,
Hmm.
then BDP also, if UDC messes up in any way, shape, or form, right? If UDC messes up, the BDP can come back. If the BDP can cultivate somewhat of a healthy political space, right,
Right.
for their people.
Hmm.
But if the UDC does well and the BDP also does that,
Yeah.
right, then we'll have an interesting 2029 election,
Hmm.
right? Because then now people have to choose either by the party color or by other metrics, right?
Right.
But inherently, it boils down to, I think it's, if people don't think their representative locally
Mm.
represents their interest, they will not vote for that person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that is where the BDP will have to, I think, contend with itself
Okay.
to say at a grassroots level, um, how do we maximize the agency of constituencies
Right. Right.
so that then when we are campaigning for vote, it's not disingenuous. People know they can vote for who they want to vote for.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's really up to the BDP to win, to fix themselves and win. So depending on who leads them, in 2029, the BDP might win, or we might have a very interesting election.
Right. Right. This is fascinating. This is very fascinating. And since you talk about the next election, and we're coming down to our last couple of questions here,
Mm,
to wrap up the conversation. But as you talk about the 2019, 2029 um,
mm,
election and just sort of conversations going forward, um, well, I think it's worth talking about the youth vote this time around. This is the people who
mm,
we're growing up with, people who are gonna be coming of age again in
yeah.
2029. Uh,
Mm.
how do they vote? How did they was there any distinct departure with them? Was this what role did the youth vote play in this
Play in this.
you know
Yeah.
and tying the youth
Mm.
vote, we can also talk about the social media age because that is
That is,
anyway
yeah.
where they live.
True.
So
Yeah.
yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the youth vote is it's a very interesting space, right? Because you have the youth who again operate within political spaces, right? Which generally it's within university environments, like university campuses. A lot of the youth there,
Right.
right, really kind of rep their set in that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that within urban areas,
Mm-hmm.
um, you had a split of youth who were like, nah, I don't really care who wins,
Right.
like who didn't vote. I remember when I went to the polling station where I have to register to vote.
Mm-hmm.
I was the youngest person there,
Yeah.
right? Right. And I came across this older gentleman, probably in his 60s, 70s, who's like, look, you know, we fought to get this, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And for as long as I have the opportunity to do this, I'm gonna do this.
Was
Right.
for context, was the voting age 18 as well?
The voting age is 18. Yes, the voting age is
Ah,
18, right? So you had people who said, I remember calling someone up for a political campaign that I was, working with.
mm,
And, he said, man, I didn't register to vote. If I had known, that there was this campaign going on, I would have registered, right? So again, I think a lot of young people, at least in the urban areas, do have an apathy towards it, right?
okay.
In many ways. But in the rural areas, I think that political life is a bit more intense
Right.
than it is in like the urban areas, insofar as people really kind of are plugged in to their party spaces, regardless of whichever one it is. And so I think that insofar as the information that we have available,
Mhm.
because the IEC has not put out a lot of the comprehensive metrics and electoral data,
Yeah.
but that in the rural areas is where a lot of the young people showed up, right, to vote and make a difference,
Right.
right,
Mm.
which again is counterintuitive if you think about it,
Yeah,
right,
very counterintuitive. Very.
but that a lot of people, a lot of rural communities is there's a lot more mobilization in those areas,
Okay. Okay. Okay.
within the community unto itself, right, because you don't have the distractions of an urban environment, right,
Right.
in the ways that people in urban environments kind of do their own thing or whatever the case is, right. And historically, we've known that urban centers are the stronghold for the ruling for the oppositions.
Hmm.
But again, in this case, we saw a resurgence of that versus 2019, where the opposition lost a lot of urban areas and won a lot of rural areas. So we
Right.
saw kind of a bit of a reversion from that.
Mm.
But young people, I think in 2019, given what the again president has talked about in his State of the Nation address around policy education and political education, we might see a different like you know we might see a different type of participation from young people,
Hmm.
right, in the elections. But absolutely, I think social media has created access to political discourse in ways in which growing up for me, we didn't have that avenue.
Hmm.
But TikTok was jumping. TikTok was jumping.
Yeah.
Facebook was jumping. X was jumping as well, like during the elections, right? So there's a lot of pockets of discourse, political discourse happening, and a lot of it again is for those who have access to the technology, right? Which as technology expands, the complexion of it might look different. I would always err on the side of being on the ground than being, digital,
Right.
particularly in Botswana, because I think on the ground is where a lot of decisions are made, is where a lot of like inroads are built, where a lot of people and engagement. Because Botswana, by and large, do respect, the traditional consultation where you come to their space and you sit and you talk to them and you hear them out, right? Which has been it's almost been an inherited tradition. I think it's a legacy of Ian Khama,
Okay.
and as much as people don't want to speak about it, where he was one of the I think when he took over, one of the big selling points of his administration was a very continuous and deliberate consultation with the public, where he would bring the cabinet members along, ministers, to say, here are your people, talk to them. Tell
Right.
them why they don't have power. Tell
Mm,
them when they can expect power,
mm.
right? Electricity. So things along those lines, right? So that is something that he set in motion
Yeah.
during his tenure.
Okay.
And it seems like it's coming back, right?
Right.
That, Duma Boko, in the first 100 days, they talked about, having consultations. They actually currently are on this national, tour where they're listening to different communities. So we are seeing this understanding of people respect being consulted, right?
Mm,
Particularly that you still have a decisive swing vote population of elderly people in the country,
mhm.
right? Who are the more consistent voters than anyone else.
Right.
And that those are the people who attend the Kota meetings, the people who attend the community meetings more than anyone. So
Yeah.
you still have to be on the ground in that way.
Right. 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 Okay. Okay. Oh, all right. So that's interesting then, and it sort of dovetails into something like what you were talking about just now, dovetails into something that I think is very important and relevant to this conversation on a regional level. And that's to say, historically, whether you look at ANC with the rural vote, right? Then maybe the DA
Mm,
challenges for the urban vote in Zimbabwe for sure. ZANU PF has that place on lock.
mm,
The rural areas, even as MDC, then it's different incarnations thereafter. Uh,
yeah,
challenged or not challenged even have had the urban areas on lock.
yeah.
Um, can we talk a little bit about so first, it sounds to me like you're saying that the 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 space is pretty tolerant, accepting of these even in rural areas of these
Mm,
different parties and sort of ideological slants, uh,
yeah.
right? Which is already like a departure in many ways because like
Mm,
when we talk about ZANU PF having these things in lock in
yeah.
uh, in rural areas. It's not just because they are very popular. It's also because they are, there's you know, there's that other thing,
Yeah.
current
True.
coercion and so forth happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so maybe if you can just quick speak on what that space looks like, but then let's tie that to say what can the region learn, or what does this mean for Southern Africa in general, Africa broadly, but Southern
Mhm.
Africa in particular. If there's any,
Yeah.
yeah.
Man, I think in Botswana we have two seminal sayings, right?
Mhm.
One being uh "Mwalebi buala gagwe," right? Which translates to, everyone is entitled to their opinion,
Mm.
loosely translated, but it's deeper than that,
Yeah.
right? And then we have one that says "Maokwa a kgotla a mantle otlhe,"
Mm.
right? Which means, at the Kotla space, all viewpoints and opinions are welcome,
Mm.
right? Or
Say
rather,
that
are
again. Say
beautiful.
that one again.
Mafoko a kgotla a mantle otlhe.
Okay.
Or, all the words spoken at the Kotla are beautiful.
Okay.
You know, that's what those two proverbs, I think, profoundly shape how we view and engage with discourse,
Mm.
right? Broadly in
Mm.
our society, right? At least in Botswana societies across the board, right?
Mhm.
That at a Kotla meeting, you can stand up and disagree with the chief. You can stand up and disagree with the minister. You can stand up and and share your opinion,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
you are protected. And historically, the institution of the Kotla protects you
Hmm.
from retribution because you are saying your words or your opinion in this hallowed space
Right. Right.
of free speech,
Hmm.
right? And so that I'll give a very prominent example of this. So there's a gentleman who passed away last year,
Okay.
named Michael Dingake.
Okay.
He's the founder of the BCP, one of the founding members of the BCP. He was a high-ranking member of the ANC during the 50s and 60s struggle. He was arrested and sent to Robben Island.
Wow.
He was incarcerated actually with Mandela in Robben Island at the
Mhm.
time, and was released released and eventually came back to Botswana and pursued his political campaign.
Mhm.
And again, like I said, he joined the BNF, became a founder of the BCP,
Mhm.
and his nephew was a diehard BDP guy,
Okay.
diehard BDP guy.
Mhm.
So this guy, who's again a father figure in his family, sort of put it, has a nephew who's BDP guy,
Mhm.
and Michael Dingaka just writes opinion pieces and political pieces for the newspapers, and
Mhm.
his nephew does as well.
Okay.
So they have this back and forth publicly. Again, this is political ideology. They're having this back and forth right on the newspaper articles, and it gets to a point where a family meeting is called
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say, "Hey guys, y'all are making us uncomfortable
We've
with
gone too far. Yeah.
with this banter because we just feel like it's tension, it's creating tension."
Yeah.
And Michael Dingake says, I fought for his right to say and believe what he wants to believe,
Mm. Mm.
and it would be hypocritical of me to silence him
Mhm.
by virtue of me being his elder
Right.
and not agreeing with him.
Mhm.
I fought for his right to say what he wants, and if he so chooses to continue this banter, we are fine.
Yeah.
So, and this is again, these are people at the highest levels of politics in their respective spaces, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they come from the same family,
Right.
right? That is how it rolls in most spaces, right? That there is an allowance to believe and support who you want to support,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Without fearing retribution.
That's all good.
In a very visceral way where people are either being killed or whatever the case, or being coerced in all these different shapes or forms, right? And I think that has been one of the major contributors to our peace,
Mhm.
right? And stability,
Mhm.
right? Because if at any point in time I know I can say what I want to say, right? I'm not going to jump out the window and say something crazy, but if I disagree, I can disagree and dissent, right? But that I'm allowed the space to do so. That people,
Let
yeah,
me put a quick pin in that, and this is I think this
yeah,
is an important thing to talk about because I get and appreciate how beautiful that is, but I also
yeah,
recognize that the principles of Ubuntu, Unu, Boto, by
yeah,
different names
yeah,
are are also not distinct to bots in that way,
yeah,
where the departure seems to be such a far swing from neighboring
mm,
nations who for an ideology or a life philosophy or
yeah,
view that is
yeah,
not only bots, which
bots,
makes
yeah,
me wonder that is there anything about the modern nation that
mm,
is different that facilitates that, because I think all these other
mm,
places want to say the same. There's even as you're talking, I can say like
yeah,
oh, similar concepts in Shona, in
yeah,
Canada culture, in
yeah.
but in practice it hasn't played out that way, at least
You
not in
play that, yeah,
years. So what
yeah,
about the contemporary state of bots allows this to be a thing in ways
yeah,
that other places that have a similar worldview at their
hmm,
social core, but
yeah.
they're fallen short in practice?
Yes. To quote a book that I've been reading,
Yeah.
uh, and this is about Japan, right? That the Japan's modernization is attributed to not being colonized,
Yeah.
right? And in some ways, I can say Botswana's unique situation is a product of its colonialism or lack thereof,
Okay.
right? In that Botswana wasn't protectorate to begin with,
Mhm.
administered from Mafeking, right? So insofar as having a pressing British presence or administrative presence that is trying to shape the social fabric of the nation versus in Zimbabwe, right, or like in South Africa or in Namibia,
Yeah.
right, where there's conversations. Just give me a second just to plug in my phone. Um, where there's conversations around, in Zimbabwe, for example, in the 1890s, right, where there's the Shona, the Shona, the martial race, right? Like there's these rhetorics that are divisive in
Mm-hmm.
many ways, right? That Botswana was not subject to that,
I see.
right? In many ways, where there's this division intently being created in these pervasive ways,
Right.
right? And then so that's I think the first kind of major building block, this development of self-determination within ourselves, like from within an insular perspective. Then the second part of it then being upon independence, right? That one representation when the first constituencies were formed,
Mm.
the MPs from those constituencies or representing those constituencies were people from those areas,
Mm, 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 Okay.
right? So that also is fundamentally important
Mm,
because then no one is artificially situated,
mm.
right? So the your representative is from your space,
Right, right.
right? Or someone who has history in that space,
Mm, mm,
right? So they're not imposed in many ways, right? And probably that's what informed the first past the post system when
mm.
it was being selected as a means of buffering
Okay.
um the fears that people might come in and try to take over your space,
Mm.
right? So there's that dimension, and then lastly, when but because we noticed that a lot of the conflicts,
Mm.
right, are economic in nature, right, or economically driven, right, and so when Botswana decides to nationalize
Mm.
all natural resources,
Mm.
that creates a neutrality,
Okay.
right, across the board,
Mm.
because then historically the first diamond mines, the coal mine, the copper nickel mine were all in. Yeah. Okay. All right. So one of the like so I mentioned the two things. One being again the colonialization or lack thereof, right, which kind of creates this insulated self-determination development. The second issue that I raised was that um, in regarding the way the electoral system works, right? The first past the post system, and that people who ran for office in '65
Mm-hmm.
were from the constituencies that they ran in,
Mm.
right? Which creates a very kind of personal attachment to the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
The electoral process,
Right.
right? The third thing was that they nationalized, natural resources,
Mm.
which again is counter to everyone else in the region who had privatized mostly, right?
So this,
Insofar as
this nationalization has been a thing since
since independence,
okay, right away. Okay.
yeah. So nationalization was one of the first things. So when diamonds are discovered in '67, you have these acts that come in '68, '69, '73 that are nationalizing, natural resources, right? And it is important to note that these natural resources were found on land that belonged to the Bamawat.
Okay.
Right. So the president's ethnic group had most of the wealth
Mm.
and they chose to nationalize it. Right. Again, if you're thinking from a privatization perspective, right, when you think about the Bafokeng in South Africa, and all these other different places where communities can monetize off of the natural resources there,
Mm-hmm.
right, it would have been par for the course,
Right.
right, to just say, well, this is what everyone is doing, so we're going to do it,
Yeah.
right? But again, being that the predominant wealth was found mostly in areas that ascribe to a certain group of people, and
Yeah.
that was willingly handed over,
Mm-hmm.
right? That also neutralizes a lot of apprehension,
Right.
insofar as it's for everyone, right? Free
Mm-hmm.
access to education, like all these different things that seminal to creating a unified nation, right? Fast forward to the 80s, where you know people around the country donate livestock in a fundraising effort to build the University of Botswana, right? To say, well, here's my cow, here's 2 goats, here's 3 sheep. This
Wow.
is my contribution to building the University of Botswana.
Wow.
Right. So if you go to the University of Botswana, in front of the library, there's a statue of a man with a plow with a cow on it, right? Which symbolizes this donation. When you look at the emblem of the University of Botswana, that is the cow horns, right?
Mm.
Again, to symbolize that legacy of people put in the work to build the institution, right? It may not have been a significant amount of money,
Mm.
right? In the grand scheme of things, but the symbolic gesture of people saying, "Hey, we don't have much. This is what we have,
Mm.
and this is how we're going to support this national project,"
Yeah.
right? So I think those three factors, right, are what I think makes Botswana unique in very fundamental ways,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That any attempt to undercut, any type of agency is received very viscerally,
Wow.
right? Because people are saying, no, 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 no. We know where we come from. We know how we get down. Right. And again, like what I had mentioned about Duma Boko and his kind of bravado in 2019,
Mm.
where people are like, nah, my boy, like that's not how
Mm.
we move over here.
Mm. Mm.
Right. So that there is a very intentional, in many ways, need to preserve what has been there.
Okay.
Right. Because if the people who had the most to gain
Mm.
gave it up, what gives you cause to not give it up?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So that foundation is critical, I
Mm-hmm.
think, to where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because if you look at the settler colonies around us,
Mm-hmm.
the economic infrastructure existed when the countries became independent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There were no conversations around economic arrangements and reorientation.
Mm-hmm.
In Zimbabwe, in Zambia, in South Africa, in Mozambique, in Angola, it was like, well, the systems are there, the infrastructure is there, it's business as usual, right? I mean, that's one of the big issues in South Africa that people are fighting over, like land being, I think, the symbolic idea around it, right? Even in Namibia, where land is the centerpiece of the economic discourse,
Oh yeah.
right? But inherently being that economic arrangements and reorientation was not discussed as a condition for independence,
Independence, yeah. And
right?
that and
Whereas
that
for
disruption. Sorry, I was just gonna say, and
yeah,
that disruption, whether you're talking about how it played out in Zimbabwe, or what the conversations around it in South Africa are right now,
yeah,
but there is past a certain point, there is no easy way this would happen.
yeah,
Anybody, you know what I mean? Like somebody
yeah,
gonna, you know,
yeah.
yeah. So yeah,
It would have been a better thing to do it in '94
right,
because
right,
then it's
right.
like that's where we've zeroed out the clock, right? So
Mm-hmm.
whereas Botswana, like there was no economy, right? So you are building it from the ground up,
Mm,
right? So then you dictate the terms,
that's yeah.
right, of what your economic infrastructure looks like,
Right,
right?
right.
Which again is profoundly different from everyone else around us, right? Where they inherited systems, and in some ways the system corrupted the people and the people corrupted the system,
Right.
right? Whereas with us, the corruption that we've seen can be attributed predominantly to human greed,
Mm,
right?
mm.
Versus like the system being built in
Uh,
a way that was designed to
to
perpetuate the subjugation of certain people over
absolutely,
others,
absolutely. Okay. All
right?
right. Wow. No, that's big. Wow. That is so informative. I mean, I've learned a lot in that very moment, and even just the fortuitous, almost fortuitous happenstance that the diamonds getting going in 1967. It's almost like they waited right until the
Yeah,
colonial
absolutely.
era
Yeah,
before.
and that's what happened. They were found, and someone's like, shh.
Oh,
Don't
wow.
tell nobody. You saw what happened to Kimberly.
Right, right, right,
Don't
right,
say
right,
nothing.
right.
And then again in '67, they're like, yeah, we found these things. What
Oh,
are they?
boy.
Diamonds?
That's
Yeah, I think that's what it is. That's what we
that's
found over here. And that they found, and I use that in quotes,
hmm.
three diamond mines in succession. Right. Right.
Oh, uncanny.
Um, so that again, it's fortuitous, right? And I
Hmm.
think that speaks to the principle maybe of the people then, and I'm not using that in this righteous,
Yeah.
you know, use of that word, but that they could see
Hmm.
how mineral wealth had destroyed Africa,
Right, right.
right? I mean, you look at
Right.
DRC now. That DRC
Hmm.
is has been at war since it was a colony. Like DRC has never known peace,
Yeah.
right? In many ways, right?
Yeah.
And it's because of the mineral issue, right? And so looking around and seeing that, man, everyone who has wealth, gets bludgeoned over the head,
Yeah.
and robbed.
Right.
So one, let's not get ourselves robbed. Let's not be flashy in these streets and get ourselves robbed.
Yeah,
But also
yeah.
two, let's try as much as possible to make sure as many people as possible can eat
Hmm.
from this wealth, so no one decides to pick up a gun and
Right.
say, I'm not eating, so nobody can eat. All
Mm.
right. So I think their principle was from that perspective to say, like, the best way to build stability is to dictate terms, but also to make the wealth distributable, across the board. Yeah.
Okay. Good, good. Okay, that's very yeah, that's very some incredible insights that we are getting here into Botswana and their recent election and how we got here and what and since we've spoken about the present, spoken about the past, perhaps in conclusion, we can ask about the sort of present slash future here, Bo, which is to say,
Yeah.
um how are people feeling as we barrel towards 100 days of
Hmm.
UDC and Aduma Boko being in office? Is it too soon
Yeah.
to tell? Is what's the vibe? Are people feeling like the
Hmm.
made the right decision here? What are the holdups? What's where we at?
Yeah. I think it's a mixed bag, right? But the general theme that I've been picking up is people are, hopefully optimistic,
Mm-hmm.
right? That again, we see a lot of this activity happening in the first 100 days, like all these moves that have been promised to be made. Um, but again, there's apprehension in that again, you're coming in hot, right? There's all the stuff that's been happening. I mean, GBV or gender-based violence has been a very hot button issue in the country. Right around the election time, there's a lady who got brutally murdered in like a murder suicide,
Mm,
um, by her boyfriend, who
okay.
was released from police custody, like following him being arrested for like domestic violence and abuse, right? So coming into that has been a very preeminent issue for the government to
Mm,
say, we are seeing this happen.
mm,
What are you doing about it?
right, right.
Right? Because it's at a point where people want to take, mob justice or vigilante justice
Mm.
routes to say, look, like if you're messing around in our community, like, we'll do it ourselves.
Yeah, we'll do it ourselves.
Right. So that is a hot button issue that a lot of people are very kind of apprehensive about. Again, the Minister of Youth and Gender, first time in political office,
Mm,
first time holding a cabinet position,
yeah.
right? So she's a lawyer as well.
Mm,
So she's not been again within a bureaucratic space
yeah.
in the way that in its rigors. So she's also in the deep end trying to deal with all these issues,
Yeah.
right? And again, because the gender dynamic brings in LGBTQIA, brings in DEI, all these different things.
Mm.
That has not been her space.
Right, right.
So she's coming into this very, hot button issue, this very tense situation,
Yeah.
right? And inheriting, a lot of institutional infrastructure that was not necessarily responsive to it. So there are things like that where she's under pressure, she's under fire. The issues around education, what the future of education looks like, um, in the country, given how dilapidated the educational architecture has been.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of issues that they're taking on, but people are saying, you know what, it's the first 100 days, let's give them a chance, right?
Right.
And I think that the sentiment that I was sharing earlier, that people can see that they're overwhelmed
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to like build the road while they drive,
Right.
is in some ways giving them a level of grace that wouldn't be given to a BDP administration,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because again, these were your people. Now, you know what I'm saying? So it's I think it's that part of it, and most importantly, where people are waiting to see definitively
Mm-hmm.
what the regime looks like,
Yeah.
particularly around some of the things that they proposed in creating, institutions and in optimizing other institutions. So people are waiting to see like what really is the progress here,
Mm-hmm.
right? Are you tearing everything down and building up something new? Are you, retooling what's old and what works?
Right,
So
right.
like those questions have not been answered yet in a very explicit way.
Okay.
And I think that once people get a general sense of what um, reconstruction approach the administration is going to take,
Mm-hmm.
that then they would be able to form, I think, more sustained opinions about it.
Okay.
But so far, I think there seems to be a genuine uh, commitment by the regime
Mm-hmm.
to do right by the people.
Okay.
Now we have to see if it persists, right? And if truly the people are going to be included in the process, right? There's been a lot of proclamations around us, we, together, unity. You have to play your part. So it's two things. Will you give me the space to play my part,
Mm-hmm.
truly? And will you actually allow me to call you out in
Right.
playing my part and hold you accountable,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because one thing to say, this is our country, we build it together, but it's a whole other thing to say, come into the fray and let's actually do the work.
Right.
So those I think are questions that are yet to be answered.
Mm-hmm. 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 Well, all right, man. So, wow. So, sincerely, we are hoping that this is a turning point, and I mean, Bots has already been on a great path, but that this elevates the nation even more. So, not so much just for your sake as Botswana,
Yeah,
but I think again as something we can point to in the region and really in across the continent as another as something else that can model good governance.
good governance. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
And to quote well, not to quote, but to paraphrase what he says in his inauguration speech, he says, for 58 years, Botswana's democracy has been unbroken and untested, but on October 30th,
Hmm.
um, it was tested and we passed with flying colors.
Wow.
Right. That has been in political science spaces, that has been the critique of Botswana, that, well, y'all have never had a power shift, so we don't know if
I don't
y'all are
even
really a
know.
democracy.
Yeah.
We don't even know. And the
Yeah.
people have said, well, now you know.
Yeah, this is how we roll.
Right. This is how we roll. Like we really about it, right?
This is
you know, so I think people are looking at it as an elevation, right? As a means to say, there's a standard,
right.
there's an expectation, there's an inheritance that we are promised, and everyone who comes into office must uphold it, or
Yeah.
we will put you in check, right? So I think that is what it's come to now,
Mhm.
and that, to your point, we hope that it's sustained,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that it also deepens participation in the complexity. And I think for those who were apprehensive in 2024 about voting or apathetic to say, well, I don't know if my vote changes anything.
Mhm.
Now they've seen it,
Right.
that people can make a difference.
Mhm.
And so that going into 2029, this is something that I plan on following, to look at the voting data for this particular election cycle and see if there's a substantial increase of voters. Controlled, of course, for like the population, the voting population eligibility, but they say, but do we see more people coming out to vote now? Because they've been shown that indeed you can change
Can make
the
change.
country. Yeah.
Indeed. Absolutely. I'm guessing just based on my own experience, and I'm somebody who pays attention, but I don't get a plethora of commentary on Botswana, and I'm within this. So
Hmm.
I can imagine that people who are further removed from these spaces may be thirsting even more. But
Yeah.
I know you are you've already been doing some things, but you are definitely pivoting into sharing more of your thoughts
Yeah.
and analyses on Botswana and other things as well. Where can
Yes.
my viewers find you? So they can um, stay tuned in
Yeah.
and see what else you're working on and what else you think, and if they have any questions for you.
Absolutely. So currently we will be launching, on YouTube, Strong People, Strong Leaders 1966 is the platform that we'll be using to at least put out the more comprehensive long form content that people can have access to. And as well as on Instagram, we'll be sharing more so like shorter clips and just kind of putting people around the more summative side of things, right? And getting people engaged in these conversations. That would also be at Strong People, Strong Leaders, 1996, or SPSL underscore 1996, 1966, sorry. So that people can get an understanding of, okay, this is what is happening in this space, right? And really the goal here is to, again, make knowledge accessible and digestible, right? So people understand really what is going on, what it means, why it's important, right? Because again, we want people to be empowered to make the best decisions, politically, socially, right? Um, and economically, of course. Yeah. So that's where a lot of our content will be, as well as on my LinkedIn page. It's Boitshoko Molefhi M.P.P. That is where you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And in case anybody didn't catch those handles, I will make sure that all the links are in the description box of this video. So you can just click on that and be sure to follow. His brother's got a lot going on, and it's all great stuff. And we just got a snippet of what I'll hit him up about half a dozen things, and it's a good time. Thank you so much for your time today, Mr. Molefhi. Really, really appreciate this conversation, and I'm sure we'll have you back on the channel. Hopefully before 2029, but definitely in 2029.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I think we'll definitely have more to talk about. I think Botswana will be an interesting place over the next 5 years. SADC is already looking, a lot is going on in SADC. And I think continentally in Africa as well, we're seeing um, a lot that's unfolding. And so there's a lot of good conversation to be had.
Indeed, for sure, for sure. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to our viewers. You guys are always great, and like I told you, this year we are doing a lot more. So, stay tuned. We'll have something else coming up very soon. Thank you very much. One.
Thank you.